Hello, my name is Skippy Mesereau, coach, former elected official, and lifetime public servant. Welcome to Healing Our Politics, the show that shows you, the heart-centered public servant and political leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. It is my job to sit down or stand up with the best experts in all areas of human development, thought leaders, coaches, therapists, authors, scientists, and more, to take the best of what they have learned and translate it specifically for the public service experience, providing you actionable, practical, tactical tools that you can test out today in your life and with your teams. I will also talk to leaders across the globe with a self-care practice, getting to know them at a deeply human and personal level so that you can learn from their challenges and journey. Warning, this is a post-partisan space. Yes, I have a bias. You have a bias. We all have a bias. Everybody gets a bias. And I will be stripping out all of the unconscious cues of bias from this space. No politics, partisanship, or policy here. Because well-being belongs to all of us. And we will all be better served if every human in leadership, regardless of party, ideology, race, or geography, are happier, healthier, and more connected. This show is about resourcing you, the human doing leadership, and trusting you to make up your own damn mind about what to do with it and what's best for your community. So, as always, with love, here we go. This episode is all about transferrable knowledge, learning from another wisdom tradition, and I sit down with entrepreneur and expert in human-centered design, Andrew Hutton. Andrew is co-founder of Day One, a teacher, coach, and former professor at the illustrious Parsons School of Design and an Elected Leaders Collective board member. In this episode, we discuss how a pig farm in Uganda took him from West Wing dreams to the mean streets of entrepreneurship, the principles, practices, and strategies of an entrepreneurial mindset and how they can be applied in your public service journey. Human-centered design and design thinking, how you can use small tests to improve professional and personal efficacy and mitigate downside risk, creating positive constraints to encourage growth, how to fail forward and build a resilient mindset, the necessity of accounting for societal factors when planning professionally and otherwise, how to use customer discovery techniques, this is fun, to create better policies, strategies to make failure your friend preemptively, and so much more. I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with my friend, Andrew Hutton. And I think today the magic is going to be translating the experience of the entrepreneur into the public policy and public service realm, talking about taking feedback, how to work with criticism, what failing forward is, and learning to apply these lessons with a different frame in service. And so I am hyped to dig in.
Me too, Skippy. Thank you so much for that. I'm so excited. I too had those same thoughts. I haven't dusted off my political hat in forever. I don't know, but you framed it perfectly. I'm sure we'll get into this. This is maybe some of my language. I don't know if you would have had this, but like entrepreneurial learning and the way you apply entrepreneurship as a practice and principle, not even to entrepreneurial activities, I think is something everyone, whether you're in politics or in education or building businesses or just a corporate person or everything in between, stay-at-home parent, I think life is better navigated with a entrepreneurial mind of trying things out, figuring things out by doing them. So yeah, excited to share some of that worldview and thought process and seed some ideas and see what comes of it.
Couldn't agree more. And I think about when I was first involved in public service, not elected office yet, but was also working on starting a company and went to something called Startup Weekend, which is basically like a 2-day boot camp of taking an idea into practice. And I remember thinking at that time, like, why the hell don't we do this for public policy frameworks? And so there is just so much of that goodness that we will get into and that, you've created. But I think for me, I always like to start these journeys at the beginning and with the human so that we know who we're talking to, where they came from, what their learning process is. And I'm going to start somewhere that may go nowhere, but I'm wondering if you could, this may be unexpected, but can you tell me about 6 months building a pig farm in Uganda?
I absolutely can start there. I honestly do think that that's where my entrepreneurial mindset really started, because that experience, so I'll even run into that. Actually, here's my political overlap. So when I went to college, I'm going all the way back. So when I started as an undergrad,
some poli-sci in there, right?
I went to school as a poli-sci / economics double major. I finished with that. And I wanted to be, no joke, I wanted to be either Sam Seaborn or Jed Bartlett, or I basically wanted to be the amalgamation. I really wanted to be Jed Bartlett, an economist, politician, but basically he was both. And he was that professorial, but wielded power, but was so human and good, brought the Bible verses out when he needed to. He had everything.
Every presidential election, Jed Bartlett gets a non-de minimis amount of votes. And there's part of me that's not pissed about it.
No, not at all. And so that was me coming into college. And because I was in my early teens going through high school when West Wing was playing literally for the first time. And my parents watched it and I remember watching it. And so I got this indoctrination into the West Wing as it was playing live. And I totally lived through season 4 being awesome and season 5 sucking. That happened to me live as younger than most people probably. Anyway, I took that into, and I had some really great teachers in high school. So again, part of my story, I'd say most people have that one formative teacher who just stand and deliver style, takes you and puts you on a pedestal, or Dead Poets. Yeah. I had that, and he was very much a mix of economics and political science and philosophy. And okay, this is a long story, but maybe it's fine. So I took that into undergrad, started these double majors, and was moving pretty fast, right? I was able to take all these other classes. I found myself, again, the West Wing sort of was my life. I was like, oh, I got to be pre-law. I got to go get the law degree. That's what all these people have. PhD in economics or law degree. So halfway through, or my sophomore year, I chose law degree. So the rest of my college time basically led to law school. So did the LSAT, the pre-law, did the internship that turned into a job where I got to really see how law firms work, a cool small boutique law firm in the suburbs of Chicago. And it was there that I saw the sausage getting made, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of paperwork, and it's 90% paperwork. And these lawyers drafting replies to responses to huge reams of submissions. And I'm like, oh, law is a tiny bit, not even a tiny bit, 0% of the law is arguing before the Supreme Court. And 99.99999% of law is wasting people's money in a zero-sum game that the lawyers are the only winners.
They always win.
Sorry to all the lawyers, right? So the 21-year-old me, I got to the end of my college career. I had been accepted into law schools. I had got my scholarships. I was down to my final 2 or 3 choices. And I was basically little existential crisis. Do I really need to go to law school to do what I want to do in life? And obviously I didn't really know what I wanted to do in life, but I wanted to be more than a lawyer. I wanted to be a Sam Seaborn, right? More than a lawyer, right? I wanted to have impact in the White House. Maybe I shouldn't take on 6 figures of debt and spend 3 extra years just getting a degree that I don't really need if I just want to go hit the ground running.
I just want to point out something right here, because I just so appreciate this about you, is you have a very insightful observational mind, but you're very practical. You didn't get tied up in the title of lawyer, etc. I
did for a long time. That's the thing.
Okay.
I was probably just a little ahead for my age, right? Most college kids are not necessarily thinking this way. I had that on. I had that as my identity for 3 or 4 years of college. But then I think a lot of young folks go through that quarter life crisis where they're 25 and they're why did I start this path? Yeah. I had that 3 years earlier. So I got to have the crisis at 21, 22 without spending those post-college. So college wasn't wasted. I got an entire sequence of life happened. But that takes us to Uganda, because as I finished college and I said no, and basically let all of my acceptances to law school lapse, I had nothing to do. So what do you do when you're a 22-year-old? So again, super fortuitous. I had a friend who graduated, who knew a little bit more of what he wanted to do with his life. And he had, over a year or so, had set up this really cool social business, literally a pig farm. So this is where it happened. So really forward-thinking guy, someone I was already admiring as like a 22-year-old, he set up this project by raising money, going over to Uganda to this small village outside of Kampala, and hooked up with a orphanage to build them a farm to be a sustainable source of revenue. Cool idea, social business idea. I was totally into it.
How did he target Uganda?
So he had some connections. He had done some volunteering over there. So this orphanage was something that he was already connected to. That's the thing. So,
Got it.
like a church connection or something.
For people listening who are like, Uganda, where's that on a map? It's an East African country, sort of central east.
Yeah, west of Kenya, landlocked, but it is on Lake Victoria, which is the source of the Nile.
Beautiful. It's what Winston Churchill called the Pearl of Africa. It's deeply rich
It's
land,
really cool.
Beautiful culture, former English colony, so English speaking, so easier to navigate. So just a number of reasons why someone might end up there.
Exactly. And it's sandwiched between Kenya and Rwanda, right? And in Kampala is near Entebbe. Entebbe's, I don't know, there's a movie about it. Yeah. So he had this thing going, again, super fortuitous. He was doing this cool thing. He actually set it up over like the summer after graduating. And then it was like, I got to come home, but this is not ready to like just give away. Like it's not ready to stand on its own. So he literally asked me, and I can't remember why it made sense. I think we were just catching up. I told him I was a free agent. And he's like, why don't you come over to literally Africa and just do what I was doing and run this thing and shepherd it for a chunk of time. I don't know if it was right away or let me think about it, but I had nothing going on. So I said yes. So I think, again, without being like, this is like my operating model for life, I was just like, let's just say yes to things.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good operating model for life generally, to say yes to big things that seem scary, because when you get into them, even if they are actually scary and hard and like kind of crazy, you'll benefit from them.
Yeah.
And so I'm a huge fan of like throwing your hat over the wall and forcing yourself to go get it. That metaphor, right? So if you're staring at a wall and you're like really scared to try, do a thing that's easy, throw your hat, and then all of a sudden your brain goes, well, now I have to go get it. So take the decision to do the hard thing away from yourself so that you end up saying yes almost by automatic. Like, I got to go get my hat or else my mom's going to kill me, kind of thing, right?
Yes,
so throw your hat over the wall and go get it.
Taking a risky action knowingly, but you're doing so in such a way that creates both positive and negative constraints to force follow through.
If I had to like wake up every day and say, I'm going to Africa, eventually you say no, because you just get realistic or something,
Such
right?
a long flight.
But you just got exactly 3 flights and stuff like that. So that's how it happened. So then I got over there. Crazy, you're right. Like English speaking, that's kind of the one positive thing in the sense of like a customization, but like wildly different culture, completely different. And I was like the boss of this business. So again, I was an entrepreneur without being an entrepreneur because—
Were your quote unquote employees Ugandans?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Was there an incoming distrust or frustration with an outsider being the one in the decision-making role?
Definitely a little bit of that. Again, like most organizations, there was like a partner board level. The orphanage had a leadership team and they were co-bosses. They were the boss, kind of. I was next underneath them, right? But I kind of answered to them. It was their land. It was their everything. We were guests helping them, right? So we were obviously listening and taking direction. But then I had a person who was actually a university grad, who was like an agricultural degreed university grad to help agronomically run the farm. And then we had like half a dozen farmhands, local guys. And obviously, like, I don't know anything about their life. That's such a distance. But yeah, just got thrown into like running a business. I literally did things like take a taxi into town and like buying feed and materials and loading them up on like a rented truck and getting them back. Crazy things.
Is like a moto with
like a boda moto. Yeah. I don't know. Everything you think about doing business in the US times like 10 in its silliness. I bought supplies. I sold pigs. I slaughtered pigs, which is not cool and fun. It was wild. I literally went to like government offices to go get stamps of approval. I bought a truck. Those sound like decently standard, but like everything was nuts.
Yes.
So let me wrap this up to say I spent 6 months over there, right? Really cool opportunity. I mentioned this was the beginning of my entrepreneurial mindset because yes, I was running a business and really I wasn't treating it very entrepreneurially. I had no craft. I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship or business. I was just doing stuff.
You're just showing up out of curiosity, like left foot, right foot, basically.
and failing forward 100%. And not even failing forward in a way that I would advise an entrepreneur to do today, which is test something, try something out, just like doing my best to stay in the game day to day, and then like little failures. And then coming up the next day, picking yourself up and being like, well, we can't just like leave. So what do we do next? Right? We lost this. This didn't come up to as far as we wanted. This cost more than we wanted it. We got less for. What do we do? What do we do? So I spent 6 months there because I got like burnt out. I was just like failing forward, had all sorts of challenges. I kind of got to the end of my like everything, kind of tapped out essentially and said, I got to go home. Can you come back in and replace me? But really, I came back, debriefed, decompressed for a while. I realized that I had like raised the bar in my life for hard things that I've ever done. And again, I'm kind of like a decently insulated kid who like the hardest thing I'd ever done was like take an AP test.
Yeah.
I like really shot up in terms of tough things. And even though I hadn't necessarily succeeded, I failed. And I think I did own that. I said like, man, this thing is further along than when we started, but we did not get our profit margins. We did not do this, that, or that. As a business,
What are the specific things that you had failed to hit?
so, our product was to raise pigs and they were not growing as fast as we wanted them to. We weren't getting the prices at market. We had this plan to like store the feed during the dry season instead of buying it at all the times. But then it got not moldy, but it got weevil. Bugs were getting into it. And so we like lost some of that. We just had stuff go bad. All the things like, again, if you have a business model, you say like, here's my top line. I'm going to sell X number of pigs for Y price. Here's my cost basis. This is how much stuff we're going to lose. All of those numbers were worse than we wanted them to be. And it was operationally like my fault.
It's interesting. I'm curious if this rings true to you, but what stands out for me here is we often, I think, can make the assumption of like, oh, selling pigs is an easy off-the-shelf business. People do it all the time. They suck at this in Uganda. I'm going to go do it. And we fail to take into account the environmental factors that make it as such, which is like, you can always get the feed right in America because you have guaranteed power off the electric grid. And so you're not going to have infestation from things. That doesn't exist there. You can go to the market and have a price here because contract law is the norm and the expectation, but there it's not. And so all of a sudden, this easy thing, once you're in that environment, turns out to be just as hard as it is for everyone else.
10,000%. And then chalk it up to the fact that like I was getting the worst price from everybody because I'm a white dude walking in.
Yes.
So I'm making mistakes. I'm getting the worst prices. And it was harder. Exactly. We were like trying to be these like white guys coming in saying like, we can build a better business, trying to like be really smart about it. And the reality is there's a reason why people feed their pigs scraps because they don't grow any faster when you feed them expensive stuff. They actually just grow at this. So absolutely. So if we had framed the whole thing as like, Andrew's going to go in and just shake it down, just try everything once and just see what the real reality is, we would have had a much better expectation. And that would have been the mindset to say, hey, pick a thing, do it. It's freaking hard. And then just set your expectations after. But we came in with a plan and a goal and all these things. And it was like just miss.
I think it's such a lesson in humility and also like environmental attunement. And
so much. Yeah. So the lessons I came away with were just infinite in terms of like, okay, this is what life is really like when you go do an unknown thing, a hard thing. But I'll tell you the number one lesson, the like ultimate thing, you can fail and survive. You're going to be here the next day. And so don't just bite off hard things. Go nuts because I came out of that a year later. So here's what happened in my career, right? I did that for 6 months with like 3 months on either side. So I chunk up a year of my life to that. Afterwards, I went to grad school. I got a job at Accenture. I did a bunch of like kind of normal businessy things. I was like playing on another level compared to my peers. And I felt it. I knew it because I had like gone through the ringer and survived. One, I think we're speaking to like folks who have been through ringers and survived, right? So maybe you can relate, right? But that was just huge. And it happened really early in my career. And I just felt like I can go through walls because I kind of gone through a wall.
I wonder what your direct experience of this is, which is to say, yes, what you're saying makes sense theoretically. I think most of us would agree with it theoretically. Like what doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
Yes.
And yet there is, I think for many, I've observed, myself included, I've been in this camp, there is a fear that if I fail at something and I'm known to be a quote failure at something, that I will be in some way extricated from community, cut off from resources, exiled, not liked. No one's going to give me a second chance. What was your direct experience with that?
Yeah, you framed it up the right way. So came home from this experience. Again, wasn't the first thing I thought. I was got to sleep in my bed and like not get haggled when I go to the grocery store. I just need to like revert to my life. But it was when I was going to apply to new jobs, right? And I was starting to describe my experiences. And it wasn't just the clubs I did in school and my classes. I had this like work experience, and not just a work experience. I did a freaking big, hard thing. I took a huge leap. Here's where I learned it. And I learned it so cleanly. I started to admit I did this hard thing. It did not go as planned. I'll say I failed. I had to tap out. Business didn't work. I was emotionally burnt out. I had to pass the keys back. And that was the end of the story, frankly. I'm like in these interviews, like I like Accenture.
Yeah.
I like distinctly remember a couple of them where I would recount the story and like use that. So I was obviously portraying that I was very humble, portraying that I was learning a lot, portraying that I was on the other side of it. And I really chalk those stories up. Again, I wasn't on the winning side yet. I was kind of in the middle, portraying these stories. And I think that's what set me apart.
Do you remember, were you scared to share that? Do you remember what you felt like?
I think I had internalized that this is how to frame it. I don't know why. So again, I was probably, what you're saying is like a big deal to me because I had started to recognize that this failure was my differentiator, that this was not a negative thing on my resume, that this was what set me apart. And when I played that card in that way, it absolutely turned into, it was that. And I just recognized it. Again, we only see things in hindsight, but a few months later, I was looking around at my peers who joined when I joined at Accenture. So Accenture, management consulting firm, not the craziest exclusive thing, but not the easiest to get into. And I'm like, why did I get in? Oh, I really probably looked like a 1% because I had done something. I had really done something different to stand out. And I had the mindset that was way more mature, I think, than, well, I was also like 24 at the time. And so I was not just a recent grad. I had life under my belt. And it just like clicked for me. So those two experiences together, between doing the thing, surviving it, recognizing that this is now my story, I'm going to own it, and then seeing how that played out as positive in other people's eyes, just solidified for me that just do things. Two things happen. You either win or you get an experience and you will come out stronger. Again, theoretically, so you said it. We all know it theoretically. I experienced one full cycle of that and I was just like hooked. So this is how it's got to be, right?
You built the confidence in action. You got the result, you got the feedback, and so it seeped into the veins and it became embodied.
It's like when a little kid does something good and their parent like smiles big. Now I'm going to play soccer because that gets my dad excited, right? And now all of a sudden they're soccer fiends for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Those reinforcing mechanisms still happen.
So for someone listening who wants to apply it, I love the way you frame this, like throw the hat over the wall and go get it. If you were to like as tightly as possible describe sort of the steps of that process from noticing the wall to deciding whether or not to throw to owning the setbacks or failures on the back end, what would that look like?
Yeah. I think honestly, it's hard to not notice the walls because they come up there's just life events. Do I try for a new job? Well, really it's less of like try for a job. It's like, do I take a job? Maybe that's different or out of my field or whatever. Do I move? Do I get in a relationship with somebody? The big life events are these walls. And it's when opportunities come your way. They're not infinite numbers of these, especially the really formative ones. If I had said no to this project, my life would be entirely different. Different. It's wild. So say yes. You'll see them. So throwing the hat over the wall is how you say yes. So it's these big life moments. I just moved. At this point in my life, 12, 15 years later, it doesn't feel nearly as big. But it's pretty big to move with a 1-year-old and start in a new city.
Yes, sir.
Most of us are going to, at some point in our life, are going to have a version of that. Do I uproot and decamp and go? And my thought to everybody is say yes at least once in your life, if not often, to that move to a new city for whatever reason. Just because of for whatever reason, right? Move to a new city, take that new job, take that new project. Might be like, Andrew, I don't get like jobs all the time. Someone asks you to run for something. I don't know, Skippy, when was the first time you ran for something? It was probably one of those like universe opportunities and you said yes, right?
You know, it's interesting. Yes and no. The first time I got asked to run for something. I was recruited by a nonprofit group
Yep.
to run for State House. And I spent a lot of time. I left where I lived. I went down to Denver. I met the team. I was there for a weekend. I considered their pitch and platform and all of that. And I loved what they were doing. I still love what they do. The organization has shifted, but they really do amazing work on healing. Well, my words, healing our
Yeah,
democracy.
cool,
That's
cool.
not how they put it. But from a much more, structural, electoral, and finance place, I decided no. But it was in the container of that intensive consideration that I got to really
Yeah.
think about what I wanted to run for and why. And that's where I made the decision. I do want to run, but not here. I want to run locally.
Everyone's going to have a flavor of it. That sounds awesome. Yeah. So the moments are going to happen. How do you throw your hat over the wall? Like I said, is there any way to just say yes and get out of the way so that your other decisions kind of already made for you? So here's the thing. This might not work for everybody, I'll admit, is that I'm one of these people that is much more driven by, call it external commitments. So if I make a commitment to you, I'm going to follow it up.
Mm-hmm.
If I make a commitment to myself, like I'm going to wake up every Saturday and go running, I'm not going to follow it up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go running every Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
but I will make this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
everything. So by saying yes to a friend and getting the hat over the wall, that worked for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, whatever gets you committed, whatever makes you commit to things, whatever you can not bear to break whatever, right? Is it to yourself? Is it to other people? I think that's a big deal. And then life just happens. And then you kind of get to, again, my thought is, if you can get over that activation hump, then you just go with it for as long as you can ride it and just take it where it goes. And now you're in a new plane, new territory, right? And again, two things happen. You either get to a good place or it doesn't work and you're way further forward in life. And by that, I mean, you've learned, you've built connections, you've got that experience. And again, just from that one experience of my life between 20 and 20, maybe whatever, 21 and 24, you move up so much faster in these moments.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, you can be in a crazy ride to the top all your entire career in life. It's more likely that you go in bursts where things are kind of steady, but then an opportunity comes and you take it and you jump up and you shift, right? So at least that's what I found.
And so then on the other side of the wall, when you come back and you're in the place of owning any setbacks or failures, and let's say you are a person who is afraid of doing that for whatever reason, totally get it. I've been there.
Yep.
What thoughts do you have on how to work with that fear and continue to act in ownership?
So I think there's kind of the head and the heart side of owning your failures, right? And so maybe it's mostly heart and the emotions of it. But the thing that plays into that for me is a mindset of here's another thing that I've found works is being vulnerable. I found that, and again, I can caveat this, maybe it's because I'm a man and men are usually not, and therefore I stand out by being vulnerable. But by being vulnerable and being willing to both talk about the failure, but talk even about the feeling of the failure or just things even one click underneath the surface, it makes it all come to life. And so somehow I got there. I wasn't in therapy or anything at the time. So I just got there myself, right? Being vulnerable enough with myself to say it, to make it real. But I found that even a lot of my career, I was on a call with some colleagues. And actually, I was kind of recounting stories like this. Actually, I wasn't recounting this story. I was recounting day one and the failure of being an entrepreneur. And I was talking about it in some of this language. And they were calling out oh, that's really vulnerable. I'm yeah, that's kind of the only way I know to operate. I found much more success in being like that than coloring over things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I fail a lot. Maybe I should win more. So I have less of these stories, but no, I think it's part of life. If you make life failing forward a good thing, there's nothing bad left.
There's nothing bad. There's nothing bad.
I don't know. That's too whatever.
If I think about my life, the times that I'm most proud of, that I would least want to give up, were the times where I was literally or figuratively stuck in the mud, because they're always the ones that have led to the greatest growth. And the actual wins, it feels like a little pin on the military jacket. It's oh, that's nice.
Right.
I don't spend any time thinking about it. It's so in the background.
Yeah.
But it's really the failures that have shaped me.
The wins are data points. They stack up in a different way, but the losses are just deeper and they're not just data points, they're experiences and they have feels. I'm thinking about every chunk of my career has the Usually the win is in taking the leap. Frankly, I'm just thinking about different career jumps and I'm like, yeah, each leap was there and then it's awesome and then it gets hard. And then
Yeah.
that's where things change and lead to the next thing, which you don't know if it's leap up, but you're at least leaping. Then in hindsight, once you get some space, those hard parts are learning moments.
Well, when you're talking about that, the vision I got or the visualization I got was like the phase change of a liquid, right? Like if you're the outside observer, you see the moment where it freezes, you see the
Mm-hmm.
moment where the water becomes gaseous, but all the work is done in between. When from the outside, it looks kind of boring, but like that's when all the interesting stuff's really happening internally.
Totally. And I'll say like even internally it's happening, but I remember like a recent switch when I left the last job I had before starting my real entrepreneurial career, day one, there was some like turmoil. It was tough. There was a season that was hard and it was the beginning of the pandemic and there was lots of changes for a lot of different businesses and organizations. And so I was like, that was a sucky time. And my learnings are only like 12 months after that of like, oh, I probably should have handled it differently. That's the reality of when you apply this mindset to life, the feedback loop is in months, if not years.
Yeah.
Okay, a 6-month tough season leads to 6 months of starting a startup, leads to 6 months of getting things going and feeling good about it. Now I can look back 18 months later and be like, oh, I probably paid attention to things that didn't matter. I probably fought some fights I didn't need to fight. I probably felt some feels that I realize are completely unnecessary. I should have been this, that, or whatever. And actually, the reason I say it like that is just because this thought process of bringing an entrepreneurial attitude to your life, the idea that it definitely can and has for me, and probably is for everybody, manifests in these actual life moves and moments. And that motion of this here, I don't know what's down the road. And that's true. You can't predict the future. So the only way to get there is to do the thing and see what happens and then iterate. In real entrepreneurship, especially if you can control some variables, those things can happen in like days and weeks. And the idea, to put it out there for everybody, is to do it in a controlled enough environment where you can even maybe test multiple things and pick the one that works. That generally doesn't happen in life. You don't get to try out 3 jobs and pick the one that works to take a job. And so really the ultimate entrepreneurial attitude is that leap. The leap where you learn as it happens and after the fact, and then you incorporate it. And then once you learn that, those motions are generally always positive. Either you win or you learn, means you take lots of leaps. And then if you can get to the point where you do things in parallel, not just in sequence, now you're learning like 10x faster than anybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the analogy, and I think you're right. In an unsupported environment, the integration of learnings is slow. It could take months, years, even decades. But like the entrepreneurial development journey, if you make the investment in whether it's having coaching relationship or being part of a cohort or a program like a day one or a startup weekend, but if you make that investment for your personal growth, you can very much accelerate that process through the daily and weekly evaluation process and iteration that you're talking about in real time. And you can not shortcut the mistakes, but you can shortcut the reuptake of the understanding and the learning from the mistakes in the same way that you would in like a weekend boot camp where you might have the same idea for the same company, but there's not someone there to push you. If you don't have someone giving you structure, if you don't have the accountability, for all the normal human reasons, it could drag on for years.
Yep. I mean, those boot camps, that concept, it is one, collapsing tons of time into a short time. It's not just that though. So let's say a project is going to take 48 hours. You can either do it in one weekend or you can do it over 1 month or 2 months or 5 months. Then you're right. There's the accountability to push it. You actually do more in 48 hours than you would over a broader amount of time because you have all those things pushing you. Add on to that, now you've got this condensation of people. So again, if you spread it out over a long period of time, you don't get those people. And that's some serendipity magic, the molecules bouncing and creating an explosion. And then on top of that, generally everyone knows that this like pressure cooker is happening. So they bring resources.
Yes.
And so they bring that knowledge and that experience, and those mentors and coaches happen. So I don't know what I'm saying here. It's just go to more boot camps is a really good recipe for moving life forward. sprints, things like that. I mean, that's why, again, like entrepreneurs do use the word sprint more than they should. And they try to use it like we're technology, everything's technology, right? But the idea of a sprint is all those things together, right? We're going to time bound things, time box things. And that just is a corollary. It's not the principle of what we're talking about. It just takes all the essences of what happens when entrepreneurial mindsets and activities are happening and makes them happen, takes away some of the variables, takes away some of your ability to not fall off the wagon, but like what happens when it's all spread out, right? You don't get the right people around you. You do kind of get a little lazy and procrastinate, right? So, man, so much is getting out of your own way.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, it reminds me of a cohort we did maybe a year and a half ago that I was co-coaching through ELC. And we had a city council member from a very small rural town in Colorado. They came in with a deeply dysfunctional council. They had no city manager. They just fired him. There was no one in leadership. They're literally getting at fights at the dais. People are sniping at each other and like as a whole thing. And not to say what caused what, but because this person was in a container with other elected officials, within, I think it was like a 9-month period, this individual was able to learn from the others in the group, find tools, find his own contribution, his own complicity in the conditions that he claimed not to want, shift his behavior, begin to show up and support other leaders. And within a year, they had a new city manager they all liked. They were doing their first strategic plan since 94, their first housing plan since. And, it's not to say that's a direct thing, but to have that regular iteration and observation is what empowers one to drive that change rather than waiting 5 election cycles, for instance.
Yeah. Well, what you're bringing up for me, and this is, again, when I think about bringing entrepreneurship to other aspects of life, whether it's politics or raising your kids or anything, the main thing to grapple with, I mean, I'm grappling with it, is how do you take an iterative approach to parts of life? Like we just said, like your career isn't as, I mean, it actually is very iterative. Like you can try something and go there, but most of us don't. We kind of play it out as like one long stretch. We don't necessarily take feedback and try the next thing. We don't treat each unit as a experiment. And so that is, again, if I was to unpack like the entrepreneurial mindset, it's to create everything around that principle. Everything in your mindset needs to be that I'm doing something, it's experiments. Mindset has to be, I've created a runway, meaning like I have time and capital and energy to do experiments. There's a saying around startups that like a startup is not a company, it's not a business. It is a organization that is meant to run experiments and find some truth about. And the reason why startups are that is because startups are new businesses, proto businesses. And if a business was already existing, you wouldn't need a startup, right? So how do you go from no business to business? Startup. And a startup is discovering a truth generally about markets, about customers and products, and what do customers need that they don't have today that is better than their alternatives. And that's the simple math of a business, right? Can I create something better?
And you tell me if there may be additional 2 primary perspectives for business building or product development. Now, of course, there's every gray in between, but there's what you're talking about, which is really applying the scientific method of hypothesis, test, feedback, not success or failure, just feedback, and then iterating based on that and doing it as quickly as possible. And this is certainly made famous by Facebook, move fast and break things, right? But works in a lot of places. In many ways, it's analogous to how AI writes your sentences very quickly. It's the same process. On the other hand, there's the Henry Ford Model T, right? Which is if I ask people what kind of vehicle they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. I have to show them the thing that they want first. And maybe you put Steve Jobs in this camp as well. And I think that, there's always room for both. In the public policy space, let's just say in policy making, it doesn't have to be from an elected body. It could be administrative work. It could be school boards, etc.
Right.
I think many people, and I've been guilty of this as well, fall into a victim mentality of, well, I'm only one of X. I'm not the decision maker. I don't get to decide. And so I might agree that taking a more experimental approach to policy making where we're testing things, where we're working with humans. And I'm going to come back to kind of human-centered design and some of these things in a second. But I might think that's a great idea. In fact, I did think that was a great idea. And I think I fell into this of like, I want to do that. And I would try to push for it, say at the council table or with staff. People would not get it. They would not want to lose control. They would have some pushback. And then I would go, oh, well, we can't do it. And what I'm realizing listening to you is I didn't chunk it small enough.
Yes.
That my job was not to make the whole system bend to this new system. It could have been to start implementing it in my own life. Like, what if I had chunked it down to 5-minute conversations with citizens on the street corner to start getting feedback of what they thought about it?
Yeah.
Or testing out individual ideas of like, what would you think about adding a trampoline to the gymnastics gym?
That's an experiment. That's a test. Yep. Chunking it down. What you implicitly mean by chunking it down is you're taking the risk of failure. So when you ask somebody, what do you think about adding a trampoline? And they go, you're an idiot. The risk of that and being negative and a failure is like nothing. So why not just go do it? So mentally, we spent the first whole chunk of this conversation being when you do big things in life, there's no real risk of failure. Just go do them.
Mm-hmm.
But we know in practice, there's a plenty of things that we just know it. Like you could just probably look at your weekly workflow that if you do things, there's some risk of failure. If you do the wrong thing, you're going to fail. Yes, that is kind of true in most business and everything, organizational, political, everything, bureaucratic environments. There's plenty of things that do not have room for failure. So as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you have to chunk it down such that if the failure happens, you either learn or you go forward. And again, now I'm just reframing failure as learn or go forward in a way that doesn't kill you. So yes. And when I was describing it for a business, right? So as startups, again, this might not be here nor there for the audience, but like when you're setting up a startup, the main thing you need to do is set it up so that the number of experiments you run, none of them kill you. If you run an experiment that's 5 months long and you only have 5 months of capital, and afterwards you have to put the startup to the side and go get a job, failure will kill you. You've literally set yourself up to be very fragile. If this experiment doesn't work, I'm going to have to go get a job and leave this business behind. That's not a good experiment. Those experiments should be 5 days, where if the first one fails, you learned and now you try the next thing. Now you have 10 of them. And if you run 10 experiments sequentially, are you way more likely to get it right than one over 5 months? Yes, every single time.
Okay.
How do you chunk these down in the political world? That's a great thought process.
I want to kind of async back memento style to just add in some concepts that people may not be familiar with.
Sure.
That I think can inform their understanding of how to use that. And so you, both as a student, as an employee, as a professor, in and around the world of design thinking and design strategy.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what is design thinking and just start to lay out some of the basic foundations of this?
Totally. So this was the driver, this theory, that's not even theory. I don't even know what you call it. This practice, design thinking, kind of got like a big D, big T, proper noun sort of thing. I did go to school for it, became this practice that I was implementing as a consultant. I kept teaching. It's very much this, if you look it up, it'll become a thing, right? So design thinking at its very core, to say it almost stupidly, is thinking like a designer. But what does that mean? A designer goes all the way back to, there's a company called IDEO. Very, very, very cool for anyone in the design world, design firm that is 50 plus years old. And in the 80s, and there's actually probably some precedents earlier than this.
They used to have their annual summits in Aspen.
Oh, really?
I think so.
I mean, they're really cool, so it doesn't surprise me. But in the 70s and 80s, the small version of this company popularized this thought, which was, hey, we're designers. We create chairs. We create things. But we're not just creating things to be functional, to work technologically. We're creating things that fit into their broader environment. They work for the human. So there's another side of design thinking. It's also called human-centered design. And it basically says, I'm not going to just design something for the business model so it makes money, or design something so it works for the functional specs. Those two things are important. It has to work and it has to make money, at least in a business. But let's design for the human, and let's take the human as they are. Let's not like presuppose that they're this like Homo economicus robot. But
Mhm.
like, let's just suppose that they like have quirks and they sit in chairs weirdly and they whatever, do all
What are you
these
talking
things.
about? I always podcast
I
like
know,
this.
right? So the principle is take people as they are and design for them, whether it's a chair, a
Mm.
mouse, or a business, or a product or service, something esoteric, right? So that has application everywhere.
I watched, I think it was a TED Talk. I could be incorrect about this. If we can find it for the show notes, we will. But it was about the use of human-centered design in building of affordable housing. And I think it was in Brazil, I want to say. And they took this approach of inviting the community in to design. And they ended up with some very unexpected outcomes, which included houses that were partially finished. And that was a way that they could allow for more people to be served because people said, hey, we want our whole community to be served and it shouldn't just be about me. And what might have been considered imperfect to the government, but actually allowed the citizen over time to expand and to personalize in a way that they found beneficial. And so they're able to do like way more with less faster.
Absolutely. I mean, what happens is you get these surprising outcomes, right? So if you ever have a top down, this is what it must be, whether it's a building code or laws generally are like that. This is what it must be for everybody. But if you let something come up organically and you design either with or for people in a community, you do get all these surprising things. And to tie some things together, you really do need to have this humble, empathetic mindset. Like you're the one in control of the outputs. You're going to create this thing. You're the designer. You're God. But no, you don't know better than the user. You have to put yourself underneath, behind, in service of the user.
Beginner's mind.
To say like, how do you need this? You might be like, a house needs 4 walls. And they go, actually, I would rather have 10 houses with 3 walls than the opposite.
Right.
And like, if that's true, and again, maybe understand why they want that. And then maybe there's another workaround where it's like, okay, well, it's actually untenable structurally to create 3-sided houses. So what if we make them with thinner walls because we thought you needed this? Again, it's all these like preconceived notions of what you think somebody needs, wants, and how they operate, how they work, and just recognizing that you don't know them. You want to learn it from them directly. And so there's so many really, really powerful tenets to this set of practices. So one is this empathy for the user, customer, constituent, whomever. Second is this iterative mindset. So one of the major overlaps between design thinking as a locus of practice and entrepreneurship, and I'll say I'm kind of practitioners of both, is the idea of experimentation and iteration. So you hear something from a user, a constituent, a customer, and they say, I want this. It's your job to go back and say, how can I deliver that and meet all my other requirements? Maybe there's a budget requirement. So again, let's just play this out as a politician, right? You hear things. You say, I need to answer what they want, but I also have to get a bunch of other people to say yes. Got to rally the troops and get the votes. I have to do it in a budgety thing, right? So I have to get creative. Creativity is just matching all those constraints and figuring out the answer. But you just can't leave that leg of the stool. You just can't ignore the customer, the user, the constituent. But to close the loop here, the idea that I hear this thing, I try this thing out, it's maybe a novel, interesting idea. Maybe I am going to try something wild. You put it in play and they come back and say, no, you got it wrong. Well, tell me what I got wrong. You're using it now. It's not working as you thought it was. What's the answer? And then going again. So when you bring those two things together, it's a little dangerous to say, I'm going to listen so much to the customer that I'm going to get it right. I think that's both like you have the empathy, but you got a little too much of I'm going to get it right. That's not going to happen. So you have to have empathy, and then you got to build it, and then you got to deploy it, and then you got to see, and then you do it again. So you really never get away from the experimental mindset. That's definitely a part of design thinking as well, in the practice and the principles. Design thinking, as much as entrepreneurship, maybe more so, is very applicable to public service. I would say entrepreneurship has a little less. I'll come back to your point of Steve Jobs and Henry Ford, that side of entrepreneurship, where it's like, I'm going to kind of tell the user what they want. It's actually more at odds to design thinking than the experimental side. It's the outlier. It's definitely the outlier. There's definitely political examples, right? Like you definitely want a leader. You don't want like Martin Luther King did not like ABC test his speeches. Actually, maybe he did. Maybe he did.
I think
he
so.
probably did, right?
The I Have a Dream speech was not written on the paper. It was a riff, or at least the I Have a Dream part of it was a riff.
Sam Seaborn ABC tested his speeches, right? There's a
Because we
real
came out of the cave
movement leader. To somebody who's like building a movement and like rallying a leader, are they ABC testing their messages? Probably, maybe. So there is definitely a place for like outlier. I don't know what you even call these folks, but it's not really entrepreneurship, frankly. It's kind of like a movement. It's kind of like borderline culty to say it both negatively and positively, right? Like you're just bringing people along. And again, this is a little theoretical, but like, let's say you were going to try to like build a new movement around X, Y, or Z, I don't know. And you got no takers, you'd have to iterate. And if you believed it so badly, but no one else believed it, you'd be the crazy person on the street corner. And that's what happened. So if you want to have impact, you both have to believe something and you have to understand what others believe. I don't know. Flip-flopping actually is not a bad thing to me. It just means you're trying stuff and you're listening. So the fact that like we ding a politician for flip-flopping is a little sad because it just means they're trying stuff and learning.
Well, it's self-defeating for sure. Okay, so understood this sort of iterative, empathetic, experiential, collectivist process where the designer is not the decision maker and the architect, but is really the facilitator, the ombudsman, and the servant.
That's a way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I actually have experience with this. Towards the end of my time in office, I was pursuing some mental health work. The community I came from, 4 times the national suicide rate. I had, through some friends, veterans and otherwise, mostly veterans, become aware of some of the breakthroughs with psychedelic mental health work. And I was interested in bringing that in as an opportunity in a therapeutic environment for my community. And no surprise, so part of this was forced, but no surprise, the political apparatus didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because it was new and weird and out there and risky and all the things that most institutions don't enjoy. And so ultimately, we do, if we're being honest, is punted it, right? Said, oh, let's just let the citizens handle this. And instead of kind of putting the tail between the legs and leaving, we chose to do exactly that. And I made a choice personally, really early on, that I wasn't going to lead the process, that I was going to help create the conditions for the community to do what was asked, to like really let the community lead. And so my role was like, get the space, send out the invites, help coordinate agendas, bring in experts, bring in policy experts, et cetera, but really let the community lead. And to your point, it ended up somewhere that I would have never imagined. That for many times I thought, oh, this has gone off the rails. It's never going to happen. It's taking forever. And it ended up in a place that was far more successful than I could have possibly imagined. And it helped a number of the people, the citizens who showed up for that, are now really important, empowered, well-funded community leaders in the space, which would never have happened if it was a government run thing.
Yeah. One of the things that I think entrepreneurship forces one to think about, here's what it is. So growing up in life, you're in school. School has, almost all of our schooling has a very set input output. Study, get a good grade. There's one answer. There's no iteration in school, frankly, all the way through. And people get really good at just winning tests and it does not create an entrepreneur. Then you go get a job and most fields also have a way to win. Consulting, banking, just any corporate job. 99% of American life does not set you up for any of these things. So that's why it's actually pretty novel, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is what entrepreneurship forces you to face, and so does politics, is that just because you have an idea doesn't matter. What matters is, do other people like that idea? Are they willing to put their money or their support or whatever is valuable on the line? Are they willing to pay you for your product or service? Are they willing to vote for you? Are they willing to rally around you? So you realize that you're a facilitator. You realize that your ideas are whatever, not precious. It's what other people take and uptake. So eventually you learn, if my thing's not getting uptaken, whether it's by my colleagues for votes, whether it's by the constituents, whether it's by the customers, again, you're not flip-flopping. You're just going where people want things. Frankly, it's the free market in action. Let people say, I want these things, whether it's democratically or in the free market. And things get off the rails when like top-down whatevers get to truly decide. No, you're all going to have bread of this kind, right? It's not going to create a very good society, right?
Authoritarian regimes of all stripes and size have not gone well. The results are in, folks.
And entrepreneurship is kind of the opposite of that. It's literally let the cards lie. And that's why businesses go out of business, because either tastes change or, frankly, my business went out of business because you build something that's not sustainable. Not enough people want it. Not enough people want it enough to pay you enough for it. So,
all right, we're going to come into that. But before we do it, let's jump into your most recent failing forward at day one. And
yeah, man.
I mean, first, maybe just describe what day one was. And it was a number of things over the years. We don't have to get into all the details and stretch it out, but help us understand what you built and then maybe some of the more exciting moments where you just felt on fire and this was shooting to the stars, and then what it felt like to move through that not materializing in the way that your excited mind may have projected.
Totally. So just a tiny bit more context, the run up. So I launched day one in the spring to summer of 2020, which was right when the pandemic was getting going, 2020. And it was my first full-on entrepreneurial, it was my first startup. I've done plenty of entrepreneurial things like in Uganda and some other projects here and there. But this was the first time I made a go of it to my day job is going to be this business. I'm going to bring in partners, outside capital, the whole 9 yards. Leading up to that, I had spent time in the world of venture capital. And so I had a very front row seat to that journey. So again, entrepreneurship, design thinking led to entrepreneurship for me. I was in the passenger seat of a lot of startups, very early stage startups. I felt the chip on my shoulder to jump in myself and have the driver's seat experience.
Well, I mean, in some ways at Accenture, correct me if I'm wrong, you were sort of the hired gun design thinker that was brought in as a very intensive day one program in a single human bodysuit to help companies grow.
Well, I'm thinking about, I'm referencing the thing I did between Accenture and day one. So that is very fair for when you're a consultant, you're embodying this new way of thinking, trying to get an organization there. That's 2 levels removed. I was at this venture capital firm called Human Ventures, where I was 1 level removed. I was as close as you can get without being in the game. And then day one, I was in the game. So that was my 3 or 4 years at each stop.
You went
journey.
From campaign volunteer to campaign staff to candidate.
Essentially. And candidate is like being
I've
a founder.
done that, by the way.
Yeah.
They're all very different, it turns out.
Exactly. And you kind of think it's an upward drop. You're getting closer to the glory, but it's kind of not very glorious to be the candidate, to be it's tough. It's tough. So the reason I say that is because I had been in this environment where I was around and supporting and building startups with entrepreneurs. Day one, my startup was also a place where I was around and supporting and building startups with entrepreneurs, but in just a different way. And so the way was to build more of one, virtual during the pandemic when everything went remote and everyone left cities. So you needed to be online to see anybody. And we obviously were quarantining anyway. So there was a year and a half or so of tailwinds where remote was everything. And there was Zoom blew up. Dozens of companies got huge in a year just because of the pandemic. We kind of got those tailwinds. We were also creating a community that had 1 part education, 1 part support. The thinking that at the time, we weren't the only ones doing this kind of thing. And everyone who was doing it was kind of all playing into a new kind of university. You don't need to go to a university to learn anymore. That's kind of not what universities, at least primarily, are for. They're for the people you meet and the container, like a boot camp, but in a bigger way, right? It's not just 2 days of a weekend. It's 2 to 4 years of your life. And you do a big thing in that compressed time frame, right? And so why does that have to be hundreds of thousands of dollars and only for 18 to 22-year-olds? So net, the business was to create a new kind of place for that. And there was a few of us doing it. We all kind of had our little flavors of how to do this, but we were creating these new places, new environments, virtual, 1 part learning, 1 part community, 1 part support and mentorship and coaching for entrepreneurs. So that's what day one was. And this idea of a cohort also kind of came out of that time period where instead of this being just a free-for-all, you have a class where you have people that are going through a class. It's basically a class. We called it a cohort. I thought it was meant to denote something different, but it really was set number of people for a set number of weeks going through a set number of sessions.
Yeah.
Whether it's, super structured or less structured. But again, took the benefits of you can't do a 4-year sprint. You can't even do can't do an infinite sprint. So you can do an 8-week sprint. So all that to say, we ran these kinds of programs. We ran these programs for the better part of 3 years in different varieties. Some were as small as a dozen, some were as big as over 100, actually. We had one that was over 100. So we had everything in between in size. And this was us experimenting. So that first year and a half, lots of experiments, but we had tailwinds. Things were going well, things were going right. Our team grew, we raised money. We got people like Gary Vaynerchuk excited to join on board as an investor. And then as the pandemic ended and the market sort of tipped over the last 2 years, 22 and 23, the tailwinds became headwinds. The market's tipping was a big deal. Sure, people got laid off from Facebook and got 12 months of severance. And in 2021, that was really cool. And they started startups and they did all this stuff. But in 2022, you got laid off from Zoom because no longer is remote nearly as big and you're more fearful. So you're not spending money. And
almost like you started building day one in America, and then 2 years later, you're building it in Uganda.
It definitely felt like a different world. In some ways, here's what's tough about it. The reason why that doesn't always quite hold is because that would have been obvious that this was different. And in some ways, it was obvious. The headlines, the pundits started talking differently, but you don't necessarily always feel it. You're like the frog in the pot of water or whatever. So that was a big learning. Again, this is like an entrepreneurial learning. I don't know if it plays over to politics, but it pays to be very attuned to these shifting winds. And we did not necessarily align our strategy. I don't know if things would have necessarily been any different, but I know we didn't get the timing. We got some timing awesome, and then we got some timing way wrong.
I think here's how it tracks, and I'll give an example. And it's regardless of what you think about the policy is not important here, but there was, ongoing multi-administration negotiations on the continuation of the peace process in the Middle East. It looks like Israel is getting closer to Saudi Arabia, some other partners.
Right.
Looks like there's going to be a big breakthrough. And then October 7th happens. And then there's the Gaza war that follows that incursion into Israel, back into Gaza. And it's like the goals, the people, none of that's changed. But all of a sudden, that falls apart, right? Because the environment around you has shifted.
Yeah. And so as an entrepreneur, you don't control that nearly. And so you got to play the hands that's dealt. And you got to, I mean, there's tons of lessons about every era of entrepreneurs. I'm definitely part of this pandemic era of entrepreneurs. And there's, Skippy, you are too. There's a lot of us, right?
We're doing it right now, baby.
There's a .com bubble in 2001. There was the financial crisis era. We kind of just lived through one of those. It was crazy in its own way. It's really hard to plan for that. You just kind of got to take your lumps sometimes. And if you have a very good business, you can come out the other side. And if you have an okay business, then maybe you don't. But anyway, I don't chalk it all the way up to the environment. That was definitely hard.
Sure.
Succeeding in business is a very high bar, especially as a startup. The bar is just very, very high. Again, if you don't know the dynamics of venture capital, it's not win a little bit. It's like go big or go home. In the middle is actually no man's land. And so you shoot for go big, and that actually exposes you to go home. And a lot of startups have gone home in a way that's kind of part of the design of the system, for good or for bad, in a very interesting way.
And now a quick break from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. This episode is supported by Elected Leaders Collective Foundation Silver level donors Melissa Stengel and Ross and Serena Pevitz, as well as Gold level donor Dave Portman. We could not do this without y'all. Thank you. And if you want more of this content, you can support us by going to electedleaderscollective.com, clicking the donate button, and getting your 501c3 tax benefit. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. You just said something that makes me want to ask you 3 separate things at the same time.
Go for it.
I can't decide.
Figure it out.
But so you help me decide where to go with that, because I think there's so much interesting, juicy stuff in here. One, I'm curious about chasing the mirage that is set by the most successful entrepreneurs versus the reality of the universe and where people land. B, I've heard you talk about people chasing VC money and politicians sharing something, which is those who deserve it most want it least.
Super real. Well, one thing I'll say just about the bigger picture is that I think my co-founder and I, when building day one, we kind of made the right call at all the right times. So in 2020, in 2021 in particular, the smart move was to swing because there was so much momentum. So you swing big. That was the optimal strategy. If money's there, you take it until it goes away and it becomes an issue, right? So there is definitely caveats and there's definitely like wiser ways to go about it. But it's extremely tough and borderline, maybe not even that smart to not take things that are there for you, as long as you don't let it take you to the wrong spot. So that's the thing where it's very easy. And we kind of did this was we took the thing that was there, the right move, but then we got a little over our skis and things shifted. So second time founder Andrew, or maybe a more gray haired founder, would have operated similarly, but like with some differences.
A little more risk mitigation.
Again, I'm now 35, smack dab in the middle of my career. And I feel like, that curve that says the people who like don't know as much are the most confident.
Yes.
I'm like on the downward trend where I'm like, I've now learned enough to know I don't know anything because I've been hit in some serious ways. And it started when I was 22. I didn't know anything and I just failed. And it took like 8 of those until 35 for me to start to be like, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I'm actually dumber than I project. And one, everyone listening, you're somewhere on that curve. Let's be serious. And 2, the faster you can get over the hump to realize what you don't know, you're going to make better decisions. But to the point of like the people who get VC are the ones who need it the least, 1,000%. I have this vast new appreciation for multi-time founders because they've learned things through the ringer that no one knows until you've gone through it. And if you've stayed in the game like multiple times and gotten punched, whether you win, lose, or draw, it says something. So like multi-time founders should get second looks and more attention. They are legit. It is legit. And again, as a first-time founder, I chafed against that. I was like, why are these other people getting such a leg up in like fundraising? And there's hundreds of thousands of first-time founders who are all trying to break in, and we're all salty. We're all salty about the nature of the game. And I'm telling you, as I'm like one step past that, the game is the game for a reason, because second-time founders have earned major, major wisdom.
Now, having worked with thousands of founders in some way or another, many first-timers, what are some of the most common misunderstandings that first-time founders hold?
I think that first-time founders get too creative. Some of the second-time founders that I've worked with more recently are building very, very clearly understandable things that are actually, frankly, way less creative than the first time founders building the next whiz bang AI for whatever. And it's like, it's because they're not solving brand new emergent things. They're solving for like problems that have been problems for 20 years, really boring parts of big businesses. And so that's a little inside baseball. And again, this is a little bit, again, I'm like getting gray hairs, and it's like I have appreciation for folks who have deep experience, because I'm like, only by being like a 50, 60-year-old person who's lived inside of an organization, like a big Texaco or something, some like big company for 30 years and knows where the problems are, that person actually knows where to like really build. I know Facebook was made by like a college kid, Mark Zuckerberg. What mistakes do first time and second time founders do differently? So I think they go for the wrong ideas. They go for ideas that are not real, too clever, versus ideas that are just simple, going to make money, etc.
What other misunderstandings do first time founders tend to have or commonly held?
First time founders, and I know this because I don't know what it feels like when it's working. And so here's the thing. By default, you don't know anything. You don't know if it's working or not working. And then you start, and by default, it's not working.
Right. The airplane's not flying itself.
Yeah. By default, you are not getting customers. First time founders, one, they don't know what it's like to feel the opposite. So in some ways, they are like that frog in the pot and it's boiling, because they're like, it's not working. They don't know the alternative. They don't know how dangerous it is to be where they are. And so that's why you see lots of first time founders play a business out like we almost did, right? For 2-3 years, and it's not quite working. It's because they kind of maybe think it's working, or it's worked a little bit and they've taken that little bit. But there is this qualitative, just draw a line, not working and working. Working meaning it's going to go and it's going to pay your bills. It's going to grow into a lot of people. It's going to serve a lot of people. It's going to do all the things. Not working is everything else. It doesn't matter if you have a lot of people or even a lot of customers, but if you're mortgaging your life, anyway, you're burning money, right? That's business. If you're not making money, you're losing money. So it's that sentiment of this is what it looks like to be building something that people want in a way that's going to like be a real business. It's hard to really add a ton more to that because it's a feeling.
Yeah. I mean, it's like being a race car driver, right? Until you can drive by feel, you can't really drive.
Totally. And so I see a lot of first time founders almost playing at it. And I'm like, see them still building their business from like 4 years ago. And I'm like, you're not really building that, are you? Because it would have either won or lost by now, right?
Yeah.
I say that, and that's a little disingenuous because like maybe it is a very slow success. Here's the thing. I'm about to say like, oh yeah, there's definitely room for these like long, that's survivorship bias. Because I can name for you 5 companies that it took 10 years to succeed. But dang, in the 10 years it took those 5 to succeed, 5 million went under. Right. So do not anchor on the 5 that went big. You're going to be one of the 5 million.
So I think this is such an interesting point. And I've heard it said, I wish I knew what the attribution was because I think this is great. I don't, but if you're out there, please take it. And I bring it back to this because we're focused on the mental well-being of leaders, not just the outward success. But I've heard it said that happiness or contentment equals reality minus expectations. And I think we so frequently misattribute reality to what we see in the news, which isn't to say what we see in the news isn't reality. But to your point, it is a very, very, very narrow sliver of quote unquote newsworthy, AKA attention worthy selection bias of the scope of reality. And I was listening to Tim Ferriss' show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about this in terms of physical fitness. It's like if you were sitting around watching the Super Bowl and you thought, oh man, I put on a couple pounds. I haven't worked out in like 6 years. I really need to get back to the gym. It would be a really poor strategy to like look up from your bowl of nachos at the TV and be like, oh, Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, he's in pretty good shape. I should be like that. I'm going to go be like Patrick Mahomes. And that is in the political world and the professional world and the entrepreneurship world. I think what most of us do most of the time is assume companies are all $1 billion. They happen in 6 months. What's the reality? if we were to dispel the mirage and yield the reality such that people do not subtract an expectation denominator higher than their numerator.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a few thoughts. One is the odds are to a high degree that like you are the average because what you see is like
how bell curve
orders
works.
of magnitude further removed from you, right? So we're looking at a bell curve. You see this little tiny edge. Anyone who makes it to Shark Tank, makes it on whatever the TV for good looking whatever shows, being a celebrity, that's the tippy tip edge. Whether you're a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left of the standard deviation of the mean, everyone is way more like you than not. And that's for entrepreneurship and for like weight, and fitness. So that's interesting. If you happen to get a look at the world, you'd almost certainly say like, oh, I'm okay. I'm a little overweight, a little underweight. You'd be like, I'm fine. You wouldn't feel the difference. I don't know if that does anything for you, but it kind of makes everyone probably stay back. The one positive thing of seeing all these superstars is maybe I want to be like that. Like I shoot for the stars, but we know that gets misinterpreted.
Yeah. We all have agency to expand or contract our envelope of possibility, whether that's the likelihood we're going to get cancer or how big our bicep is or whatever. But we exist within parameters that are set in some way by nature.
Yeah.
And so when we're comparing ourselves to people who not only have had the best training in the known world in the history of man, but are also probably just genetic freaks.
Yeah, right.
We set ourselves up for failure. And so what I'm hearing from you is like, even if you're not in the middle of the bell curve, well, statistically, that's the most likely outcome, but maybe you're not. But what if you were? And what if you thought through what you would do if you were, from not a surrender position of, oh, this is a reason not to proceed, but from an empowered position of what can I do to bend my own bell curve the most?
That's where I was going to go. So one, recognize you're on one or two sides of the standard devs of the middle. And then two, the solution, the action plan to get anywhere further forward, again, not even to the top, because whatever, is not to copy what those people did, because it's not realistic. It's not even real. It's not even steps. So let's say I'm going to give you entrepreneurship lessons. Let's say there's a parallel for how to have fitness lessons. The problem is, and this happens in entrepreneurship and in fitness, is that the best way to break through the noise and to sell a bunch of courses or to get a lot of people is to show those outliers and to kind of like sell the dream.
Yeah, that's right.
We just all have to recognize this is where like information, like internet literacy, we all have to recognize we live in a world where all the incentives are to lie about the path. Because if I told you what it took, it'd be boring and lame and would not break through and be sexy. That's for fitness. That's for entrepreneurship. Frankly, it's for mental well-being.
Yes.
And so we're doing a version of that. We're basically saying like, it's not sexy, but it's real and raw and honest. And we're having fun conversations about it. And these are the beginnings of the tips and tricks. And it doesn't look like a 20-step plan. It doesn't look like anything like this.
Let's ask like, what are the realities of, let's say, building a business? So if you look at whether it's people that have passed through day one or just general stats that you're aware of entrepreneurship in general, things like what percentage of companies succeed. When we think of success in terms of like the lifestyle of the founder and income, what does that actually look like? How long does it take? Like what's like the real ground truth of what's happening in the middle of the bell curve?
Yeah. Most of the stats are around like 90% of companies will fail in 5 years. I would say that's probably directionally right. There's also stats of like more people are starting businesses now than ever. There's definitely more accessibility and tools, and the internet is obviously not new, but like we're definitely continually just pushing in directions of like there's all sorts of reasons and abilities to start. Failure rate is still very high. And I think the way I reckon with that, I think it's actually very natural for most businesses to die, in the sense that markets are shifting, tastes are shifting, you're as an entrepreneur shifting. And so just because you even have something that's working for a minute doesn't mean it's going to stay around. And so that could be like a tire shop. That could be a new, never before seen thing, something digital, something community based, something software based. Could be, like I said, like a sweaty startup. That's a fun term of just doing like a landscaping business, right? Landscaping businesses are as standard as they come. If you just try hard enough and put the effort in, the odds are you're going to get somewhere. But the odds are you're also going to die in 5 years or so, just because you're going to maybe move on or
be tired
or whatever. So all that to say, I do think entrepreneurship just has this idea of failure baked in. I don't think we can avoid it. We shouldn't avoid it. And so, one, that takes me back to learn all you can. Two, the reality is you stack up 2 or 3 failures. And if you can set those failures up, this goes way back to the beginning of our conversation. If you can do those 2 or 3 entrepreneurial failures in a way that doesn't kill you, in a way that doesn't mortgage your house, these are learning journeys, you only need one win. The stats are just really skewed because you're still part of the 90% of businesses that died. But ultimately, you're getting yourself as like a person into like, you're doing something great for yourself and for your family.
Yeah.
And so that's the promise of entrepreneurship. And what's tough about that, again, just back to the idea of like, you see these like winners and they only show the positive end journey and don't always talk about the middle. And even if they told you this is how great I am now, and you can be here too, are the steps the same? Yeah, we're still wrestling with the distance there. There's really not many straight lines in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and it's incumbent upon and beneficial to us as leaders to question our own assumptions, our own projections about people, because when they're incorrect, they actually hurt us. So just as an example, Andrew, you were in this camp for me. I'm not going to say anything that I'm about to say is untrue, but wow, look at Andrew. He's running this big company. They've had tens of cohorts through. They've got this super fancy social media guy supporting him. They're raising millions of dollars. He's on podcasts. He's on the TV. Like Andrew's got it made. And in my there's some little part of my mind that's like looking at Andrew on a yacht, sipping back, like it's his second yacht because the first one broke down and he's in Mayorkas and, there's like supermodels that like that runs through my head. And I have that with I've had 2 coaching sessions with 2 people that in a similar kind of position to where you are, obviously won't disclose who they are, but run successful organizations that have, international acclaim and membership that get to meet with the coolest people around. Like they had all of that. And then you drop in and it's like, oh, well, they have a house. They're lucky in that way, but they're kind of just scraping by. They're not saving money. The wife is upset because they just had a kid and they don't know if they can afford daycare. They're working all the time to keep the thing afloat. Is the passion still? And it's like, whoa, that mirage that I'm basing my success off of, that I'm benchmarking my success off of is so not real.
I completely resonate with that. Every business is a shit show underneath the hood, whether they're succeeding or not. Succeeding shit shows, again, it's an entire spectrum of like rocket ship has one version, going well, just over the middle line, just under the middle line, and then everything. And this is the thing. I did this, which is you definitely paint the rosiest picture you can on social media. There is no incentive. There's very little incentive. Everything I said before about being vulnerable, Andrew operates like that. But the business, day one, did not operate like that. The business was not vulnerable. The business was like, we're killing it every single time. And of course, that rubs off maybe on me a little bit, but like, yeah, every business is doing that. Every single one. And some are flat out lying straight up, the same way like Instagram pictures are doctored. These are just like fake. Some are just like portraying only the good stuff. That's standard. So yeah, it's endemic. You really cannot base anything self-worth, business worth. You definitely shouldn't base your worth on your business as well. Let's to get that on the table as well, because your businesses will die and they're going to go to zero and you're going to make way less money than you made at your very standard job.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I don't know if you agree with this, Skippy, which is I've gotten to the point where I think entrepreneurship as a mindset and practice, kind of like design thinking, is pretty valuable for everybody. It's pretty universal. All things equal, it's better to be comfortable with failure. It's better to be comfortable and be experimental. It's better to be empathetic to your customers. But the real journey of jumping into startup or even to start a small business is definitely not for everybody. But it's hard to say that to anyone's face because you're probably going to know that after you've done 2 or 3 of these. Does that carry over to politics? Which is, it'd be so good if everybody was more involved, if everybody cared a little bit more about their communities, if everybody was a little more informed about the issues and had opinions that were informed, but not nearly everybody should run or actively get involved in a way that's beyond just participating. Does that align?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly 100% aligns in that what I've found in my own life and in the coaching practice is that really the biggest linchpin, the greatest superpower is when you recognize there are no bad experiences in life. There are only enjoyable experiences and experiences you learn from. And through repetition, through the power of reps and survivorship bias, we must say out the other side, you come to recognize that your moments of greatest internal strife and challenge are the moments that best served you in life. And then you can switch into a place where in the moment, when you're being challenged, not that it doesn't hurt, but you actually get a little bit excited about it. You recognize something's coming. And when that switch flips, you're in a different universe. And I experienced that right in the middle of my last term in office, where I went from a place of what I would have thought initially was like empowered leadership and whatever, but was really like kind of selfish victim-y mentality, into one that was really about facilitating public good, working with others, like seeing the losses, quote unquote, as just steps, just stepping stones. And so I think 100% I agree with your conclusion about the mindset. I think that the political space or the lawmaking space would benefit from more of design thinking, but it's different than entrepreneurship because, like you said, you get to chunk things down to a place where it's not going to kill you. But in the public sphere, you're often thinking about real life and death decisions, and not just for you, but for thousands or millions of people.
Yeah.
And you don't have the same space to take risks in many places.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to parse out where that type of work is appropriate and where it's not. You wouldn't want to turn well, maybe you would. I don't know. I don't want to, I assume you wouldn't want to turn over your water sanitation district, for instance, to an iterative public-led process. I could see that going off the rails.
Right. This again, I probably get immediately hypothetical in that situation. Obviously, you wouldn't let people vote on technical water things. That's just silly.
Well, increasingly it's happening, and we don't have to go down that road, but increasingly it's happening, and I would argue the results aren't good.
No, I mean, I wouldn't suggest it. I wouldn't believe they'd be good either. My political science background, my strongest held belief is that I'm a big fan of representative government, which is pick your people and let them do their thing.
Do the thing. And so that's getting back to your second question was my point is like, no, it's not for everyone by design. It's designed to free you, Andrew, up to go build day one. It's designed to free you, fictitious person named Sally.
So there is a parallel where almost by definition, it's not designed for everybody to be in the arena running these things and to be vying the arena of ideas and elections and such. But it would be great if everybody was a participant and had some mindsets that were informed. And then, I don't think everyone should be in the arena, mortgaging their house to go start a startup, right? But everyone can be design led and entrepreneurial. And the end state of that mindset of design thinking, entrepreneurship applied anywhere is you shouldn't make the water process at the big level. Can you chunk it down? Can you just try out? Can you take 5 different solutions, solvents, whatever and just take water off to the side so it's zero impact on anybody and try the thing out? There is always a way to try and experiment on a thing. Again, me kind of shitting on politics. There's a world where you're going to get further by being a diatribe for your specific solution versus, hey, why don't we create a little test bed, try out 5 things in a way that nobody gets hurt. It's like the clinical trial mindset. We're going to actually get to better outcomes.
Or you could have a subset of people and ask them what's most important
just
to
whatever
them
it
in
is,
their
right?
Water delivery, right? Is it
exactly
just reliability? Is it temperature? Is it purity? Right? All of that.
A test can be any. See, that's a fun thought process. What are tests? So that happens in entrepreneurship a lot because it's a very non-standard thought process for somebody to even think in experimentations. They don't. They think in inputs and outputs. I do a thing and it has an impact. And so in lots of ways, and this is a little bit of the craft of being an entrepreneur, is thinking, what ways can I experiment? What can I try? And so just framing a conversation as an experiment is really, really good. Go ask. So let's think of all the ways you can experiment. Go ask different people, not just the people that you maybe get on the phone when you call them, but go to different places and get different people. Ask them different questions. They might answer questions differently. Show up with something, show up with a thing, show them 2 different things. Don't trust their answers, make them experience it. This is the thing. I could ideate with anybody to be like, what are you working on? What legislation's on the table? What are the questions people have? One side likes this, one side doesn't like that. This is the issue. I'm actually going to try to take all issues and make them black and white. Okay, so there's something to be understood here. So, standard things like let's understand the other side. I'm not even going to talk about that. It's more of, what could we do to go get better data to show one is the right way or the wrong way?
Yeah, it's so funny. So there's two things that are coming to mind as like real world application examples of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
in the policy space that I think might help illustrate for someone like how to expand sort of the Overton window of like where we could go with this. So following the water example, anyone who's been to Paris in France will know that in addition to regular water fountains, there are carbonated water fountains, which is the thing that you think
I didn't
only could
realize
happen
that.
in France. But it is delightful. It's a
Yeah.
joy. I can't imagine a city hall in America that comes up with that solution. But I could imagine a experimentally minded group of staffers putting together a working group and starting to ask some leading questions around what do you want from your water and unearthing some unexpected results of like, we want to enjoy time with family in a park. Oh, okay. Well, what makes you really enjoy lunch does? Oh, what are your
Mm-hmm.
favorite things with lunch? And it's like, oh, carbonated
Mm-hmm.
water. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Would have never done that. How much money would it cost to do that at sort, right? And so you could see how
Mm-hmm.
opening the aperture to something that would seem closed loop could yield a result like that and would
Mm-hmm.
ultimately result in more joy from the citizenry that is directly associated with the government, which potentially could then create a feedback loop of trust. You could find this cascading waterfall of positive effects from something that you would have never planned. And the second thought that came through is related to this because I've heard you say what you control is inputs, but you're judged on the outputs.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that quote from you. And there was a project, this is from memory, the details aren't going to be precise, but there was a major rail project to increase the speed of the high speed rail going into London from some of the outlying areas. And this project took, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years, billions of dollars, and ended up saving something like 7 to 11 minutes off of the route. And I was reading a book from a world famous designer who said, oh, okay, well, several billion dollars, all this time, you save 7 to 11 minutes. He's like, you could have given me a hundredth of that budget. I would have put a beautiful coffee shop on board, hired models to be the servers in the train, and people would have asked me to spend 11 more minutes on the train.
The name is escaping me too. He's a prolific speaker, designer, and it's reframing. I mean, that's the ultimate side of like human psychology.
Yes.
You've spent all this money to make the time go faster because that's all you can think about. But
you're making a baseline assumption at moment one that the end goal is efficiency without ever really checking in to see what people want. Maybe they just want more time to work or with their kids. Maybe they would have just loved Wi-Fi, in a desk. There may have been so many other paths of less resistance and better outcome for the citizenry if you had just checked in earlier, asked the right questions, and critically done it in the right environment. And this is now me editorializing, but asking people through a newspaper that 4% of citizens read
exactly
to come give public comment in a scary room filled by cameras where they feel like they're on trial and they've done something wrong before they walk in is not going to reliably source the audience that you seek, nor the openness of opinion that you desire. Like, you have to cultivate the environment if you want to have authentic and representative response.
You're right. There's design thinking in there, which is, hey, let's get outside the box. Let's change what the question is we're even asking. What do you want in your rail experience? And then try this on. There's some point in the process where you have to requisition money to do anything. What if the first moment was, instead of requisitioning anything, I'm going to requisition 25 grand, which is drops in the bucket. 2, take one route and put one coffee shop with these waitresses or waiters, right? And try it out and then do some surveys. That's an experiment within the scope of things.
Yes.
Someone literally could have gone rogue. This is what I think is fun. Could you go rogue and do that? Could you go rogue and just show up with boxes of Joe and just some good looking friends and just be like, I'm going to make this train trip enjoyable and pass out coffee.
Yeah, put a little GoPro in the corner and
be
just count the smiles afterwards.
So like, if I was an entrepreneur, again, entrepreneurs have to be pirates because by definition, they're creating something new. They can be pirates in most free markets, whereas in the government, it might be a little harder. But all that to say is the essence of that is there have to be chunkable, testable things that if you could show that GoPro or you could show those surveys, you'd be like, let's go this way. And again, like the idea sounds good. Data is better, straight up. So if you can go close the loop, so you listen, idea, experiment, data, now you roll it out and you save $15 billion, whatever. That's good practice.
Okay. So that's a perfect segue to something that you're kind of famous for, and I think is super applicable for this audience, which is this idea of customer discovery.
Cool.
Famously have 100 conversations with 100 people in 100 days. What is customer discovery? Why should we care about it? How does it work?
So you mentioned the version of it, a big piece of it, which is when you talk to people, getting in that environment. But fundamentally, it's the idea of any startup, any business. The first fundamental mindset is your ideas are, at best, guesses, hypotheses, if we're going to be scientific. And the answer lies in the market, the customer. And so if you're not talking to them in a serious way, and talking to them as a bare minimum, talking to them in the right way, which is what you described, right? Not in a scary way, but in a way that elicits real information. And better than talking to them, getting them to experience things in a small, indicative way. Customer discovery is learning from your customers, the people that ultimately matter, about what the truth is. The truth is about this specific thing, meaning this hypothesis. Is it right or wrong? Frankly, this is the big thing we haven't talked about. Before you go jump in and outlay $15 billion, before you go in and outlay your mortgage your house, before you go and outlay 3 years of your life. So actually, that's a big thing. So why do customer discovery, frankly, and why do design thinking? Why do anything experimental? It's because we have scarce resources. $15 billion for a train, 5 years of your life, your house, all these things that you would have to put on the line. You would rather have more confidence and more proof before you make big bets. So customer discovery is just one of the best ways to go de-risk, validate is a word I'll use a lot, and give yourself confidence, and not just yourself. Again, because you can be overconfident, you can be falsely confident, but give true confidence and rationale for why a thing is the right thing to do. So talking to your customers is a simple way to say it, and you'll get very far if you just do that. And then you can layer in, again, it's a whole discipline and practice. Talk to them in the right way. Ask them the right questions. Be very iterative about the questions and the way you ask them. And then even further, get them to experience the thing. So the train example is a perfect example.
So let's really break that down. So first you have identifying the correct quote unquote audience. Then you have asking the correct quote unquote questions. And then you have in the right way. How do you first select your audience?
Yeah, this is fun because ultimately who your audience is, there's a lot of people in the world. The world is way bigger than any of us can conceive. Billions and billions of people. The internet is huge. The city you live in is way bigger than you think. So you think you want to talk to these certain people, whether it's to sell them something or because you think they're the constituents that are going to love your new initiative. You think. It's a hypothesis. So I say you just have to start somewhere. You just have to have a hypothesis. Again, the scientific method starts with a hypothesis. I think this is true. I don't know
Which you should write down.
Which you should write
clarify,
down.
Right?
Be as clear as again, the scientific method creates things that are invalidatable, meaning you can disprove it. And if you create a hypothesis that's not disprovable, you haven't been scientific. That's where pseudoscience comes in. You say things that are just unfalsifiable.
Could you do this for us as if you're back at day one of your day one? Like what was your first hypothesis? And then how did you find your audience?
So our hypothesis was that there is a new-ish, they've been around, but there's now more class of entrepreneurial people who are embarking on entrepreneurial journeys. They're somewhere between -6 months, meaning they might not have even left their day job, to 6 months in to their entrepreneurial journey, and they're floundering. So who is this person? Generally internet native, white collar professionals who were active on Twitter and or mostly Twitter, frankly, or certain LinkedIn communities.
Just to clarify for me, so the hypothesis is there is a floundering group of proto-entrepreneurs who we can help.
Well,
Then
that's two
you're
hypotheses. It's the who, the group
Okay.
of entrepreneurs or proto-entrepreneurs. And then the other hypothesis is, what is their problem or their need?
Okay.
And so the need is they are looking for community, they're looking for education, they're looking for a leg up, the things that happen when you're part of an in crowd. And so one thing I'll say about our hypothesis is that's like a few too many things altogether, right?
Mhm.
One of those could be true more than the other. It's hard to differentiate if you don't separate them.
If you were going back to do it again, what would be your opening hypothesis, recognizing that that does not preclude you from having a future hypothesis?
I'd focus on one of those things. Is it community? Is it
Okay.
education? Is it mentorship, etc.? I would have focused on one specific need. So you have the who, you have the why, and then the what is what you bring to the table. And that's a hypothesis. I think that by creating a virtual cohort-based community, we'll deliver this. We'll solve for that need. Actually, really what I'm saying is solve for that need, but solve for that need in such a way that people will put money down, and not just any amount of money, enough money to pay me and my staff to make a business. And it's not just put money down, but love it so much that they tell their friends.
Okay, so you have these three initial hypotheses. You need to confirm all of them to some degree to have a successful business, but you're just going to test out the first one to start. That's going to be the who. And so then when...
That's not entirely true, right? So a business is interesting because you have to test those first three together. Because the who, the problem, and the solution, they're a package. And this is what's really tough about it, is you can be a little right and a little wrong. So the way we tested it was we just put a website up and launched it on social media and had a form that somebody could sign up on. We didn't take any money right away either. We just said, are you interested? And we got like 100 people to sign up within like a week. And we told them there was a price. And so we kind of knew this was close to real. So yeah, the test, if I had put a paywall right away, I would have gotten different information. I don't know if it would have been better or smart, but you can adjust things like that. Do you charge right away? Do you charge down the road? How specific do I make it? So I made it decently unspecific, which meant I was testing that. Do people find themselves in this more broadly described thing? We basically got some good yeses for the first while, and then and then things changed. Or another way to say it is our bar got a lot higher too. And so we had a good thing, but it wasn't a great thing.
Once you had the 200 and a bit in the door, did you then proceed to do direct customer discovery or calls with them to find out which parts of that stuff were true? Or how does that work?
Yeah. So this is where, as a practitioner who's so close to it, sometimes I like fudge my own rules. So I did calls before that launch to understand and talk to people. We launched it, and then we kind of got just busy doing it. And we weren't nearly as structured to ask them what's happening. And that's obviously a little bit to our detriment. We really should have been super structured about, why are you coming here? What's working? What's not working? Do more of that, less of this. We got some feedback, but I would probably change it a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily wholesale change what we did, just because net in the end, that is sort of like life and what happens. And it's the art of it, is you really, as much as I'll teach you these things, you do them differently in practice.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this process so that others hopefully do. Maybe I'm denser than the listener, probably so. But so you're first creating a hypothesis. In this case, it's a multi-tiered hypothesis, but for the sake of this recap, let's focus on, there is a proto-entrepreneur within 6 months of, starting a business who needs assistance. And so then you're creating falsifiable claims that can be tested, things that can be disproven, which would include some of the things you mentioned. They are within that time frame of starting a business. They, in fact, have a pulse. We can reach them on Twitter and Instagram. They are struggling with X, Y, and Z. And so you can then pick up the phone, identify people that meet what you believe is that group, have conversations. And so now you're in the conversation, and you have to have the conversation the right way. What does that mean?
What's that question? So the right question, this is actually a little more cut and dry, in the sense that the right question is just one that is not leading. So you don't presuppose the answer and say like, so you really hated it when this happened, right?
Don't be a push-pull, people.
So open-ended. How did you feel when this happened? So asking open-ended questions and generally asking past tense questions. Because if you ask future tense questions, how would you react if this happened? Again, it's open-ended, but it's like pontificating. But if you say, the last time you went to the grocery store, how did you feel when this happened? That's going to be real. So there's really two premises: open-ended questions and past tense and as specific as possible. If you ask questions in those two ways about the thing you care about, you're asking good questions. And then it becomes a little bit of art because people's answers are never completely they're not answering it like a survey. You want to listen to everything: their excitement, their intonation, the specifics. Do they go into other areas? All these things. So you do have to kind of read between the lines. But if you can ask it those ways, you're in a much better spot than so would you like it if this was created for you? They will say yes every time. And that's a false positive.
Right. Which is only going to harm you downstream.
Yeah. You're just going to waste time and money on the wrong thing and think you're right. But you're actually definitely wrong. And you don't know why it's going to be very bad.
And our minds are wired for confirmation bias. We like to seek evidence that confirms our previously held beliefs. And we can also tie our ego, our identity, to an idea in such a way. Like if you have an idea for something, and I have a coffee cup right here that is an elephant and it makes me happy. And I've decided that everyone will be happier with elephant cups. And I'm going out and calling to have my customer discovery to determine if, in fact, there are people who drink liquids and would be happier out of an elephant cup. If I hear people say that's a fucking stupid idea, or I'd be pissed, I don't like whatever it is, and I'm having a negative emotional reaction, I've identified with that. I have tied my identity to this idea, and I'm no longer taking the critique as a critique of the idea. I'm taking it as a critique of me in some way. It means I'm stupid. It means I don't understand people. It means I don't fit in. There's some deeper level story that is unconsciously being triggered that is causing me to react in that way. And so I'm wondering, what do you do, if anything, to either prepare for that so that you're not identified with your idea, or to process those emotions if and when they come up?
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those things where you have an issue with somebody, but you don't talk about it right away and you let it build and it builds and builds and gets way bigger. So the best thing to do is the faster you're moving, the faster you're having ideas and trying them, everything will feel that these are quicker, faster, breakable, discardable things. And so that's the best way to get ahead of it all. It is to be like, I'm going to have a new idea next week, so let's just move on. But then that cuts the other way. I've seen people do this. They hold on to an idea for too long and it's like, this has gotten way too big. You just need to ship it. Just get it out of your ear. And so that then is pulling teeth and pushing, and it's tough. And so, yes, you really need to find yourself. The best place to be is in a mode where it's moving fast and kind of happening. That's the main tactical thing I can say to get your mind in a spot where you treat the idea as a very killable thing. And then if you are holding on to ideas, it just means that your environment is not such that you have any, truly psychological safety around saying either to yourself or to your co-founder or to anyone, boss, investors, this was a bad idea. I like to get to a spot where I'm working with people where I tell them we're going to try things and they're not going to work. Get ready for it. And all you have to do is say that up front. And if everyone's on board with that and then you pay it off, then you're in the clear.
The way that I've used that most successfully is I am not great at remembering names. And especially when you're in the public light, you're meeting, sometimes hundreds of people a day. The single best strategy I ever identified was every time I meet somebody, I say, hey, so nice to meet you. I'm really bad at remembering names. If I ask you again, I apologize. It's just because I really want to know. You own it. And it's freedom to your spirit. But you've also now switched the thing, because now if and when you forget, you're no longer forgetting because you're careless. You are asking because you care.
Yeah.
Which is also authentically true.
Yes.
And so that really resonates with me. I think, just tell the team up front.
That's the same principle. It resonates. It shows them that I care enough that this is how we're going to operate. And I know this is the best way to do it. And so come along.
So good. So good. Andrew, this has been so fun. There are still innumerable things on my sheet that I really hoped we could get to. So maybe they'll be around too, but we always finish this show with the same question for every guest. And I want to just really thank and celebrate you for bringing wisdom from a knowledge tradition that is foreign to many of us in. And I really hope that it can be transferred and used. And I think there's a lot of gold here to do that with. The question is this: the humans listening to this podcast are not passive observers. They are the humans in the arena. And if you were to leave them with just one thing, one thought, one idea, one quote, one practice, one anything that would best resource them to be a personal vector for healing our politics, what would you leave them with?
All these things that we've said of preparing, being ready to fail, all these things really come home when you've set up your environment to accept those attitudes and those practices. Walking into a meeting saying like, hey guys, this is going to get interrupted in this way, or like we're setting up a budget. Hey guys, we're going to set aside money and we're going to do this thing. Or again, whatever the setting that intention, setting that space and getting the right people aligned to you is going to give you all the air cover you need to then put those in practice and create that feedback loop. You're going to bring people into this new way of thinking and working and living. They're going to feel it. They're going to see you guys going faster and moving. And then it's all going to snowball from there. Create that space. That's an awesome way to get this thing going. And then it'll just happen.
Beautiful. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the Healing Our Politics podcast. It's just awesome to spend time with you, brother.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate you, Skippy. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to put what you've heard here today into practice, sign up for our newsletter, The Leader's Handbook, where each month you'll receive just one email with a curated selection of the most useful tools and practices discussed on this podcast today and over the course of the last month, delivered in simple how-to worksheets, videos, and audio guides, so you and your teams can try and test these out in your own life and see what best serves you. And lastly, if you want to be a vector for healing our politics, if you want to do your part, take out your phone right now and share this podcast with 5 colleagues you care about. Send a simple text, drop a line, and leave the ball in their court. Because the truth is, the more those around you do their work, the better it will show up in your life, in your community, and in your world. Have a beautiful day. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code #PoliticalHealer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code #PoliticalHealer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.